One of my favorite books, I mean, actually, I would say my favorite book of all time is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And in this book, the concept of having basically a demon in training and is being written to by his uncle, who is also like a senior demon trainer. Basically, it outlines the idea of how each person has their own personal demon who always tries to strike at them and to turn them to this path of sin in their personal lives. And it outlines how, in the Screwtape Letters, the guy actually fails. The demon fails to turn the guy over to sin. But it's really interesting, intriguing, because it outlines all the ways that the devil is able to strike at us. And C.S. Lewis is actually one of the greatest Christian writers of all time, probably the greatest of all time, one of the big influential thinkers of the 20th century. And so I've been seeing on Instagram and stuff right now some of you guys are going to be going into these habits, these destructive addictions, which are always pervading our lives. And you guys think that perhaps it's actually good, perhaps it'll actually help your stress, your depression. Well, I know us Chinese people know it's bad to do drugs and all that stuff, but there's a lot more to it, okay? Make sure there's all these addictions you can go into. I don't know. Just make sure that you're living a healthy life. Make sure that while you're in this studying, you can actually find ways to um, de stress without turning to these nasty habits, which will grow into addictions and which will really hurt you in the long run. And so we reach our poem today, which is Digging by Seamus Heaney. And this is probably the easiest poem you're ever going to get in all of them. And it is the first one. So I know you guys, you go from number 1 to 22. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Rodney, and I'm in grade 12, graduating class of 2019. Here to help you with all your mock IOCs and to get you prepared, get you get you that 7 that you really desire, and perhaps to teach you some lessons along the way. Don't be like me, guys. Don't be crazy. Don't have weird speech habits. Make sure that you can be articulate. So we're going to start our mock IOC right now with Digging, which is probably, yes, as I just said, the easiest poem to analyze and the best one. That's why it is so easy to identify all of these points. I'm going to start my 8 minutes right now. Digging is the one of Seamus Heaney's most famous poems, and it's part of the 1966 collection, Death of a Naturalist, which really gave Heaney a platform to express his views on nature and to use nature to push themes not explicitly about the political, but also about his own life and about the Irish identity. And in Digging specifically, the original title of this poem was Going Away. And this really has an emphasis on the idea of why did Heaney himself chose to become a poet, and also reflecting on his past, the past of Ireland, and what his responsibility is as a poet. And to begin with, we are going to use the argument of the fact that there is a consistent rhythm in digging to signify this idea of how, as generations pass by, there is still no there is the changes between them will ultimately not affect the heart of the characters. And in this, we meet the persona, the idea in the first stanza, the couplet. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. This simile, which is separated by the semicolon, describes how the gun is possibly like a weapon. Because the only reason why a gun would be snug in your fingers is if you're used to shooting, is if you actually know how to use it. So this connotes the idea of skill, synonymous with the soldier, and this is how Heaney's diction works. Perhaps he's reflecting on himself, how he is using it, the gun, which is a powerful instrument, but he wants to use it for good. And this is emphasized with the alliteration squat and snug, which we will see multiple times. This sound device of the alliteration, which creates the sense of rhythm of the digging itself. And in the second stanza, this is what is emphasized: the idea of digging, how this oxymoron of the clean rasping sound. When we think of rasping, we think it's jarring. It's a cacophony to the ears. But still, this sets up the idea that Heaney is himself, the persona, is making a personal decision. However, he has already decided with the idea of the pen at the beginning of the poem, contrasting with that at the end. However, his reflections are here to explain why he is doing this. The idea of under in the fourth line, third line, he says under my window, which is setting up the idea of staging in this poem, and how he is above the actions of his forefathers, how his father is down below. He has to look down at the end of this stanza with the caesura, how his father is straining in the flower beds, how perhaps Heaney is looking down with this air of condescension. But another interpretation of this is that the fact that he's digging below is actually digging into the past. So when Heaney looks into the past, he himself is digging, because he is, by digging down, we go deeper into the past and we are able to comprehend what our ancestors did. And even in the seventh line, the fact that when the father is digging and comes up 20 years away, this contributes to this sense of timelessness. There's a short amount of time in 20 years compared to how much all of his ancestors has done. And this really contributes to this idea of how vast the scope is in this poem, and perhaps why Heaney sees himself as just a small, minuscule part of this. And perhaps that contributes to his choice, which is the what I'll talk about in my second part, the tonal shift in the couplet in the fifth stanza, how the old man could handle a spade just like his old man. Again, this repetition of ideas. And the reason why is because there's a contrast between the grandfather and the father. The father is growing potatoes, while the grandfather cut turf. And in this mention, turf is mentioned twice at the beginning and the end of that long stanza, the sixth stanza. Turf is meant to symbolize peat, which is basically the type of decomposed matter that is found in wetlands. And this serves the purpose of providing energy. But in this case, the peat has become useless. How this idea contributes to the theme of the poem, that there's a reason why Heaney cannot carry on this legacy in the physical sense, in the literal sense, that the turf, the peat has become useless, that there are other alternatives to peat as energy, that now they can burn coal and oil as what Britain has done, and that Ireland itself is is losing its sense of identity. So this is why in the sixth stanza as well, in the middle of the sixth stanza, Heaney actually brings himself down to the same level as his grandfather. He remembers in Toner's Bog, which is a fictional place, how he brought him milk in a bottle. And in this section of the poem, the rhythm stops. There's a lack of alliteration until the grandfather begins to dig again. And this is the reason why this is important is because the going down and down means that perhaps Heaney believes that he is intruding on their actions, on the act of the digging, and that he doesn't want to impose himself. Perhaps he doesn't want to learn, but he still admires the action. This is the main theme. He still believes in this squelch and slap, the onomatopoeia. He finds it beautiful. This act, the potato mold. The mold is a double entendre. It could mean either the literal sense of the potato molding, or it could also mean that he's molding himself, and that the curt cuts of the edge of an edge, though through living roots awaken in his head. There's a lack of punctuation in this sentence. However, you could take it as meaning that these ideas that his father and his grandfather had in their own minds continue in him, and that they're actually growing in his head. This idea of growing, sprouting out of the ground, having to be dug up. But he has no spade to follow men like them. This means that instead his spade is the pen. And in the last stanza, instead of saying snug as a gun, he says he'll dig with it. And this is the final point of the poem, that Heaney is averting the violent aspects of his own country, and that by using the pen, he believes he is fulfilling his responsibility both to his father and to that of his country. Perfect ending, right? Okay, there's my 8 minutes up, and now's the time for us to reflect on how I did on this digging IOC. I feel like with digging, you might have more of a challenge with your marker, because they probably, well, not the IB person. The IB person is probably really stupid, but your teacher knows this poem the best, obviously. And the fact is that when you're analyzing, you have to work harder with this poem. So I said it was really easy at the beginning. You also have to focus on, what did I not? I talked about sound devices. I talked about the tone shift. I also talked about the mood, imagery, figurative language. You have so much time. You can just make that mental checklist. In one of my other videos, I talked about how you need to list tone, mood, structure, sound devices. All of these literary devices, all 5 of these, make sure you address them all, or else your teacher will ask you about it in that 2 minutes you have. I'm kind of losing my voice now. This is like the 13th video I've done. The 13th video in 2 days. It's pretty annoying. I'm gonna lose my voice at this rate. And I have to do my actual IOC. I don't want to lose my voice on that day. So, but I also want to talk with you. I want to communicate with you. This is how I become less lonely. So I hope you guys realize that I'm trying to help you, but then you're also helping me. Thanks. Thank you a lot for listening to this video. I actually hope that you learned something from it, and that you guys can get a 7 on your IOCs. You can really, everyone is capable of doing it, okay? Just make sure you listen, you work hard, don't be depressed. Keep praying. Read the Bible every day. Make sure, guys.